I am Dr. Appleman,
I'm Dr. Robbins.
and we will be your guides today for exploring the universe of learning in Salesforce.
So a short while ago, Dan and I were working in the laboratory in San Jose, California, where we both hail from. And we were having some conversation with an astrologer and a cosmetologist.
Right. A cosmetologist as well, exploring the nature of the Salesforce universe.
Right. And actually, the astrologer pointed us at an astronomer. The astronomer referred to Carl Sagan. Carl, unfortunately, died a number of years ago. So that led us to Stephen Hawkins.
He's not with us anymore either.
Right.
It's very sad.
But the concept of the Big Bang came across our mental model, and we had this epiphany that essentially the Salesforce platform is an ever-expanding Big Bang. For those of you who don't know what the Big Bang is when everything sort of started and it's been going out, and it continues outward. And I just like a quick straw poll. How many people agree with that statement, that it seems to be ever-expanding and getting larger? I think we have a unanimous.
We have scientific proof that our theory is correct.
There we go.
From all of these wonderful astrologers and cosmetologists who are with us today.
Exactly.
Other way.
Oh, the other way. Thank you. So we decided that in order to have a conversation around this, we needed a slightly more down-to-earth visual. The visual we chose was an elephant. And we've taken the elephant and we sort of divided it up into pieces of the Salesforce platform. They're just representative pieces. There's actually a lot more than that. And we also realized that this is sort of a continually growing problem. The elephant continues to get fatter because with each release of Salesforce, there's more to learn. And that's why this Big Bang concept intersects with this challenge about acquiring knowledge. So there's an old riddle, how do you eat an elephant?
With a spoon.
With a spoon. You know the actual answer? One bite at a time. So we decided to take the elephant and apply this theory. Okay, well, if we start biting off pieces of the elephant, what'll happen? So we said, okay, well, we're both developers. We focus from the developer standpoint. So we chose the Salesforce platform. We bit it off. What did we get? Another elephant. Okay, so let's figure, let's keep going. Let's pick another developer concept. We both like lightning components. We bit off lightning components. What did we get? G, another elephant. Now, of course, in the interim, lightning web components came out. So it's actually two elephants, twins.
They cloned it.
They cloned the elephant. And it's similar, but not exactly the same. So we started biting off pieces of the Aura elephant. And what did we get? More elephants. And this just sort of seems to keep going. So, of course, what do?
This is the one place in the world where elephants are not endangered. So infographics are all very well and good, but as scientists, we need hard numbers and hard data. So we started by taking a look at the size of the release notes, every release. And as you can see, it's grown significantly. In 2011, every 4 months, you needed to keep up. You just have 100 pages to look through. Not too big a deal. Now, we're approaching 500 to 600 pages, which means that just keeping up, just your time to keep up with what's going on in each release has gone up by a factor of 5 or 6 since then. And there's no sign that that's going to go down. Now we have MuleSoft and other technologies and so on. So that's one interesting curve that demonstrates the challenges we're facing now. In addition to that, take a look at the Apex Developer Guide. Now remember, there are many, many, many documents when you go to developer.salesforce.com. But as an Apex developer, this is my Bible. And when I started, I don't even know how long it was. I started even before that. But it was 500 pages, which is very digestible. But now we're over 3,000 and growing, which means that not only is it hard to keep up, but somebody entering the space has a heavier lift, a much higher amount to learn. And you could say, well, you don't read all 3,000 pages of the developer guide, and that's true. But those of you who've worked with the developer guide know that some of the most important things are those tiny little footnotes, the little, they'll have a concept and then there'll be like 5 or 6 bullets of when it doesn't work or why it doesn't work or special cases or so on. And those are things that you really do have to know. So having familiarity with the developer guide is actually quite important. So as a result, there's been a sea change in the nature of Salesforce development really in the past 5 or 6 years, where those of us who've been around for a while, in the early days, you could be a Salesforce expert. You could know the platform. You could, have your certifications and knowledge, and you could know the platform. You could know Salesforce. And those days are gone. We cannot do that. None of us. Nobody in this room, certainly not distinguished professors such as us, can know the entire platform. So first of all, it's important to accept that. It is a source of stress in our lives, the challenge of keeping up. And we just have Lightning Web Components, which for all of us who've been doing Salesforce in general or Lightning Components, look at that and there's this, oh, this is exciting. It's, oh my God, I have to learn twice as much now, a whole new set. And it's a little overwhelming. And we are all in that situation. So do not panic and do not stress. This is the nature of our lives right now.
Drugs are good too. So.
Yes.
So what we decided to do in order to have a conversation around this is to break down sort of the objectives of knowledge acquisition and learning into formulas, into a series of expressions. Because what we realize is that the success on the platform is dependent on any practitioner's level of knowledge and expertise. And this should be measurable. Knowledge is acquired and cultivated over time, but you have to keep up, right? So we just said, I got to learn Apex. There's a 3,000-page developer's guide, but then there's the release notes, which change the developer's guide. And by the way, there's stuff I learned 5 years ago, and now the release notes are going to tell me that something's different, then I'm going to abandon a certain chunk of my knowledge and replace it with the latest knowledge. This is really a daunting exercise. So what you need is strategy. You actually have to think about your knowledge acquisition, your learning methods, your targets, if you will, and why you would target anything in a particular manner in a particular point in time also in your existence. There's another really important point, that you have something which I like to call a knowledge state, the state of your knowledge. And it changes over time. And again, it will impact your conscious targeting of what it is you're trying to learn. It's a very important concept to keep an open mind and also to leave your ego behind. Sometimes when people have been on a platform for a long time, particularly in the developer world, we like to say they carry their egos around with them in a suitcase because they know so much, right? So leave the suitcase home, keep an open mind as you work through this. Let's look at the first of our formulas, but talk a little bit about digging deeper down.
Okay. So again, we're going to be doing this scientifically or pseudo-scientifically, and the formulas we're going to present are expressions of the way we look at learning and keeping up. So the first one is we want to talk about return on investment. As Salesforce practitioners, we love the platform. We do it for fun, of course, but we also need to make a living. So we care very much of how our learning translates into income. So in this equation, the return on investment is the income that can be generated by a certain amount of learning times the lifespan of what you learned. So if you invest in learning something that becomes obsolete very quickly, it has a short lifespan, then that is lower. But if it lasts a longer time, then your return on investment is greater, divided by the time spent learning. So if you have to invest a lot of time learning, then obviously the return on investment drops somewhat.
Yeah, and actually, I just want to question about two skills. S controls. How much money can you make knowing S controls?
At this point, probably very little.
How many people know what an S control is? Okay, so you've been around a little while. An S control predates Visual Force, right? So they're still supported, but you can't create them anymore. So
early, when I started out, I was building S controls.
So
Visual Force just showed up, and it was like, oh, this is good. This is nice.
What about soft skills?
So this is actually a really, really important point because when you think about soft skills, interpersonal skills, interviewing skills, and so on, you don't think of those necessarily as Salesforce skills, but they're incredibly important because while a given soft skill may not generate income by itself, the lifespan of soft skills is lifetime. So if they are leveraged over a long period of time, and they serve as multipliers of your technical skills. A simple example is, it doesn't matter how many certifications you have and how knowledgeable you are if you don't know how to interview, right? Nobody will hire you if you can't interview. So that's an example of how a soft skill has huge value over time and lasts for a lifetime. Another way of looking at return on investment is, we're looking at it in a deeper level, is the incremental income for learning something varies over time. So what does this mean? When you start out and you're learning very basic knowledge, at the beginning, the very start of the curve, right down there, there isn't a lot of income increase because you're learning the very basics that everybody knows. So, you know, it's like, I know how to, you know, update a lead. Well, everybody knows how to update a lead. We're not going to pay you a lot to update a lead. But once you go beyond the basics, you start having a very rapid increase as you learn things, very rapid increase in your income capability as you learn some of the more advanced features, not the super advanced features, but that's where you start seeing benefit. And there's a peak right here where you are competent. You now know how to do things. Most of the things you need to do, you know how to do. Occasionally you have to look up something, but you're competent. And at that point, anything more you learn has a lower and lower incremental value. So you don't necessarily want to keep learning it. We call this the peak point of competence. This is the point where you are now capable, you're competent of doing your work, of generating income, and the more things you know, as you learn more things, your income doesn't necessarily increase. And that's sort of a sign that it's time to go and learn something else.
It isn't so much of that this isn't worthwhile, it's that there's a point of diminishing returns, right? Unless, perhaps, you need it for something.
Right, so this can vary by individual. For example, if you are a trainer, then being, like Professor Robbins here, if you are a trainer, then having deep expertise, learning the subtleties of the platform and so on, can have great value because you can answer more questions during a training session, and you are seen as more valuable, and you can get more training sessions, and your curve is skewed. But for most people who are working on the platform, it looks something like this. And you really want to be learning up to the peak point of competence. You reach that point, learn something else.
Move on, basically.
Right. Another huge change in the world has been the nature of knowledge. Did we skip one? No, this is right. What does it cost to answer a technical question? Back in ancient history, prehistoric times, 1980 or so on, knowledge was power. Knowledge was costly because knowledge was hard to get. You didn't have an internet. You'd have to go to a top university. You would have to go to a library. You'd have to buy books. Knowledge was expensive, so knowledge had value. Just knowing things had value. But today, virtually all knowledge is free. All Salesforce knowledge, the core knowledge is there. So the value of knowledge has dropped. So what counts now is not what you know, because everybody can know anything. What counts are your skills, your ability to use that knowledge and to solve problems using knowledge. The knowledge itself has very little value, which is interesting because, and I think we'll talk later about things like Trailhead and certifications tend to measure knowledge, not as much skill.
Yeah, it's the application of the knowledge and the perspective that you gain from it in applying it over time. We're going to talk about that a little bit later
right.
as well.
So again, knowing how to apply what you find is what is key. Another aspect of the cost to answer a technical question has to do with time from release. When a new technology first appears, when it first goes GA, it's very new. And the cost to use it tends to be very expensive for a number of reasons. First of all, nobody really knows how it works yet in the real world. You know, people have developed it, they've deployed it, and so on. But what are the best practices? Nobody really knows yet. If you have a problem or a question, you might be the first person to run into that problem. You won't find blog posts yet. You won't find answers on Salesforce Stack Exchange. So it tends to be very costly to work with newer technologies, and that cost drops very rapidly as you go into subsequent releases. So if you wait on a given technology until, you know, say, a year after general availability, everything's there. There are more samples. There's more documentation. If you run into a problem or a question, bugs have been fixed. So you don't have to fight with the challenges of a brand new technology. We call people who work at GA, that's the bleeding edge. And this isn't just Salesforce, it's every technology. And it's the bleeding edge because it's incredibly painful. So unless you have an incredible need to use that new technology, that it will drive a lot of revenue, that there's huge value to you, or you are a trainer or an author, somebody who is our job is to
bleed,
to eat the raw elephant, as you will. Unless you're in that situation, you should, when a new technology is announced, even though, you know, it's a Dreamforce. Well, Dreamforce isn't fair because they're talking about the technologies that are not going to appear for another few releases. But when something goes GA, that's not the time, in most cases, to really start getting excited and using it. You have time. It becomes easier and cheaper to learn a little bit later if you wait.
Or, you know, you can explore it, but betting the farm on it can be risky. That's really the message.
Right. So the closer to release time, the more expensive it is to learn and work on any technology. Now let's talk about the cost to obtain a skill, because that's what we're talking about.
The difference between a skill and knowledge?
Skills versus knowledge. So what does it cost to obtain a skill? Knowledge is free, of course, but skills still cost. So the formula here is there's practice. So you learn by doing. Right? Anybody who, if you've ever hired someone who just studied and took certification exams but has never actually done anything on the platform, you know what I'm talking about. Actually working and doing things, that's how you really learn. And the effort to do it one time, obviously if you're doing something hard, the more repetitions, the more costly it is to do it, even though hopefully it gets easier over time. But still, learning a skill, if it's a hard skill, then it's going to cost more to learn. What reduces the cost are the effectiveness and level of your learning content, and I'm not going to discuss those now because we're going to get into those in a moment. And the motivation, and this one is very important because if you are strongly motivated or excited about a particular technology, it's easier to learn. The time just flies by as you're learning it.
So we're going to talk a little bit about learning content because along with the Big Bang and the platform getting larger, obviously, there's a lot of learning content which follows as well. There's more to dig through in order to work with the ever-expanding technology. So this formula is the learning content effectiveness. So basically, you know, you go out on YouTube and there are videos, or you download documentation, and there's Trailhead, and there's training classes, and there's just a ton of learning content. And what we tried to do here is break down into a series of add-end type variables different effectiveness attributes, where you can actually evaluate the content and try to determine for you, because there is an extra variable here I'll talk about in a minute, the potential effectiveness of the content. So I'm just going to quickly go over each one. PR, presentation. Is it presentation type content, you know, which is a sequential delivery, like sitting through a slideshow, sitting through somebody lecturing you on a particular topic and presenting images and narrative. Demonstration, where they're actually showing how something works. They're showing it in the product. I'm going to walk you through how this works. I'm going to show you a flow. I'm going to show you how it gets built. Explanation along the way. I'm going to talk about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it to sort of explain it, not just sort of show myself doing it. Conversation, which is really, now we're sort of getting into really sort of powerful stuff, because in addition to whoever is delivering it, no matter what the medium, whether it's live or in a class or maybe even on a webinar, the conversation allows for an interactive feedback. And this is where it gets really interesting, because as somebody is presenting something to you, you're formulating questions in your head. You don't quite understand, well, how would I do that or whatever? And conversation allows you to redirect that presentation or that explanation. Participation is really powerful because it means you're actually doing something. And of course, when we do something and get it into our muscle memory, really gives you a much better feel for something, because you're going to be doing it yourself. Iterating on it, drilling, right? We all know about drill and practice. So the more you go over this over and over and over again, the more it sinks into your brain and your muscle memory. Evaluation is, well, did you do it right? Right? Knowing whether or not you approached it effectively or correctly, and then getting the feedback loop on, okay, well, I'm going to fix this. And then some kind of validation that you did do it right, a badge perhaps, or a certification. All of these added together for any particular piece of learning content can help you gauge its level of effectiveness. However, there's a variable.
So I was actually wondering about that. Are these numbers constant, or do they vary by individual?
They're individual, because everybody has different learning preferences, right? So you really need to understand your own learning preferences. What works well for you? Some people love to go out and get a book. I can sit down and I could read Dan's Win32 API book from 1992, yeah. And dig through, 5,000 pages, or, the Apex Developers Guide, read it cover to cover. I know people like that. That's how they absorb knowledge. And some people say, I ain't touching that with a 10-foot pole. Give me a video, please, right? So everybody has their own preferences for how they want to consume content and information.
Right. I think an example are the play-by-plays on Pluralsight that you've been working on as major research project.
Conversational. Get somebody talking about a topic that they're expertise in and ask them questions to explain what they meant by that, as opposed to just letting somebody spout on and on and on. So it depends on how you like to learn. Very, very important. Content effectiveness. It increases when more attributes are present, and the caveat, that fit your particular learning style. Here's how you can also use a couple of extra, sort of a different orthogonal angle on content effectiveness, what I call the level of effectiveness. And the LOB is the level of breadth, basically how full the span of knowledge is, the information that any particular content addresses. So that would be the breadth, but there's also the depth. How deep does it go? And usually it's one or the other. So that's why we have a Boolean or in the middle there, because content's usually going to be very, very wide or very, very deep. And then the other two multipliers here have to do with the creator or creators of the content. One is the level of expertise. In other words, the creator's subject matter expertise. But there's another very important one, which is the instructional design skills of that creator. Because somebody might be expert in something. Anybody ever go to college and have a professor who was an expert in a particular topic?
I had that professor, yes,
yeah,
but could not teach if his life depended on it.
Right, so they can be totally brilliant. Cornell used to do this. They would have graduate students coming doing their dissertations, and they had to teach a course, and they typically would stick them in the 101 course, and everybody would fall asleep because the people didn't know how to teach. So the level of expertise combined with the instructional design skills of that creator are really critical to this. Content effectiveness increases with better teaching.
So the LOE and the IDS represent teaching.
Represent teaching or teaching skills, how you convey the information. The information itself is one thing. The type of content, the medium, is another. But the level of expertise of the individuals who put that content together and their skills with regards to instructional pedagogy, if you will. How is something best taught? In what sequence? In small chunks it builds up, as opposed to just vomiting knowledge all over you, which isn't very effective and sort of messy.
That's why we wear lab coats.
That is why we wear lab coats. That's correct. We talked about knowledge state briefly. Let's break down knowledge state. So I like to break down knowledge state into really 3 levels. K1 is what you know, because everybody knows what they know. I mean, you just know it, right? That's easy. That's the easy one. K2 is a little tricky, because it's what you know that you don't know, except that you might not really know that. But you think you know what you don't know, so you go after that which you think you need to learn, and often what you run into is K3, which is what you don't know, which is what you really need to know, except you didn't know it, so you're not going to go after it. And this is really challenging. And there's an additional variable here, which is n, which is a constant. And you can't know what the constant is, because it depends on that thing that you don't know, but since you don't know it, you don't know it. And because you don't know that you don't know it, you don't really know what the effect is going to be.
And you don't know what it's going to cost
I
either.
don't know. Right. So the total of your knowledge is going to be sort of a combination. So I have a sum of two add-ins here. I have the IL and the AL. And the IL is the intentional learning, that which you go to seek. You know, you don't know, or you think you don't know. So you go seeking something, and that's your intentional learning. I want to go learn about platform events. Okay, but there's also accidental learning, because along the way of the thing that you're targeting that you don't know, you're going to run into other stuff. So you have accidental learning, and that can be good, but it can also take you down the wrong path, and that's the red herring. For those of you who don't know the expression red herring, and I won't go back to the etymology of the expression, but basically a red herring is a misleading or distracting clue. You think you need to learn that, but because you don't know what you don't know, you really don't. And the problem with red herrings is the n constant. They can turn into, they're cute, right? But they can turn into that and really bloody you. Dan, you have an example of one of those?
I did actually just a few weeks ago. I ran into a very puzzling situation where I had, how many of you are developers, Apex? A fair number of Apex people. So for those of you who aren't, I apologize, but I'm going to get a little technical here. Inside of an asynchronous operation, a queuable Apex call, I would do a for update query. If you do a for update query, it locks the record until the end of the transaction. And it's great because it's one place you might use it is to query an object that instructs you to do something. You do the thing, and you don't have to worry about someone else touching the record while you're doing it. For admins, you see this sometimes where on a page, you're trying to save a record, and you get a big warning that says someone else is editing that record. So we call this a record lock. And Apex developers know that if you do a for update query, it's locked until the end of the transaction. Yet I was finding, for some reason, that at the end of the transaction, when I tried to delete the object, it would fail saying the object was already deleted. And this is impossible. If you lock a record with a query and you try to delete it, it must succeed because the record was locked. Nobody else can touch it. Nobody else can delete it, except that they could. And I was going nuts trying to figure out what was happening. I thought maybe it's a platform bug. I found more than one of those. And it turned out that after some conversation and research, that if you do a call out during a transaction, it unlocks all of your queries. Who knew?
It's a feature, not a bug.
It actually shows up in the Salesforce known issues as a no fix. They will not fix this. People reported it as a bug, and they're not fixing it because it's by design. You don't want to lock the database while you're doing a call out. It would have been nice if they had told us about this.
Would have been nice to know, but you didn't know that you didn't know it.
And I did hear from someone that they had intended to document this, but that the person who was involved in that documentation retired before they got a chance to actually get that into that 3,000-page document. So, but it's exciting. It was
How much time did you spend on it?
I don't even want to think about how much time I spent on it.
Man-eating shark.
I mean, because it involved, figuring it out involved capturing multiple debug logs, because you're looking at two different transactions, one doing the deletion and one doing the locking, on something that only happens occasionally, once in a while if you get unlucky. So it was a lot of time figuring that one out, and it's actually opened a whole new area of research, which will hopefully I will be able to present at another conference, maybe Dreamforce or something, on how to deal with that particular situation. How many people knew about this one? How many people are surprised by this one? Yeah, some of the Apex developers said, no, that should not happen. Surprise.
So this is, also the thing about keeping an open mind. Gee, well, maybe it should do this, but...
Right. That was like, oh, this is by design? Okay, I now have to completely change my way of thinking about callouts.
Well, first you want to verify and validate.
Yes.
So another really key point is learning time, because the elephant grows bigger and more elephants, but your time grows shorter, ever shorter. You don't have that much time for learning. So this formula is talking about learning efficiency, and TL represents the targeted learning, right? So that's a combination of the prior slide. Targeted learning, minimizing the unknown unknowns, and certainly the red herrings and those sharks. And then the multiplier is the learning content effectiveness that we talked about with all those add-ins. And then there's that KWS, knowing when to stop learning, and that refers back to...
It refers back to the peak point of competence. But there's also another aspect of knowing when to stop learning, because the amount of knowledge is beyond the ability of any of us to comprehend. At a certain point, one has to put it down and eat, sleep, drink, spend time with family,
Pleasures.
and actually have a life. Because if you are on the treadmill, if you feel this intense desire to keep up with everything, that's not possible. So that's another aspect of knowing when to stop learning.
And it can really have a debilitating effect on your health.
It's really hard.
And I'm not kidding around here. I mean, I know people who
We're wearing doctor's coats.
That's right. So we've learned over time. Dan and I have more than our share of gray hair, and more than our share of experiences of what unsustainability means. So you really do have to keep a good work-life balance as you pursue this impossible task. Right? Learning time reduced by avoiding distractions, knowing when to stop, and certainly watching out for those red herrings that turn into man-eating sharks. The last slide, understanding the difference between knowledge and wisdom, which I find really critical. So the total wisdom acquired is the knowledge acquired times time on the platform. Time is a really, really important component of wisdom, because you know that we have to speed it up here. We know that we have to speed it up here. So what we're going to say is that the time on the platform multiplies your amount of knowledge, and that is multiplied times project failure divided by project success. And project failure is a really, really critical element. Do you want to speak to project failure?
It is ironic, isn't it, that if something succeeds, we don't necessarily gain wisdom from it. It's like, oh, it worked. I knew it would work. It worked. That's great. But failure is a great teacher. So if you're not failing, you're really not learning. In fact, this is another area of future research that we're looking at is formulas that allow you to balance the learning value of failure versus the risk of being fired for it.
So in summary, test your knowledge, verify it, validate it, prove that you're right, prove that you're wrong.
Remember that keeping up, when we talk about keeping up, the challenge is partly keeping up with new things, but a greater challenge is recognizing the things that have become obsolete. Technological obsolescence is this is one of the few fields where if you stand still, you fail. There are other careers where you learn and your knowledge keeps growing and building on itself. This is another reason why soft skills are so valuable, because you can keep building on them. They don't become obsolete ever.
Right. You have to grow your knowledge. You have to combine it. You have to expand it. You have to put it together in new ways that you didn't think about, which really sort of keeps up with that ever expansion. And the most important one, of course.
This is supposed to be fun, right? We know this because we're wearing lab coats. If you're not having fun, you're probably not doing it right, or you're probably doing the wrong thing. And I think that's really important because, we learn from play. Right? Little children learn from play, and that doesn't stop. So if you're having fun, if it's playful, if you're playing around and having fun with the technology, you'll learn more efficiently, you'll learn more effectively, and the time will go by enjoyably.
Right. And present your knowledge. Find ways to share your knowledge. That's what the Ohana is all about. The Ohana is, more than just a Hawaiian catchphrase and hype by Salesforce. The Ohana is real. That's why there's 400 people here. That's why you're here as part of the Ohana. We're part of the Ohana. You're all part of a family, and it's one of the unique things about Salesforce. It truly is. And we've been through lots of different technologies over the years, and Salesforce is really unique, which is why we're here. Share it. Knowledge is the only thing that when you give it away, you end up with more. It's why teachers teach. If I give you half my sandwich for lunch, I'm left with half a sandwich, right? But if I give you my knowledge, the way you absorb it, the way you question it, the way you talk about it with me, I'll end up learning something and I'll get more back than what I gave away.
And then, if you like, choose areas to learn deeper, and then you too can become the expert. And remember, experts don't know everything because you can't know everything. Experts just know a little bit more and have the courage to just say, okay, yes, I have some expertise here, so I will propose a talk for London's Calling or for Dreamforce or so on, because this is something that I'm passionate about and have some expertise in.
And people will take your knowledge and they will grow it, and they will grow on top of it. So that's it.
Questions?
They don't know what they don't know.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What do you want to do about the lab coats?
Let's donate them.